Hello, I'm back here again with another DIY install. This time it was the MRCOOL universal HVAC system that includes an air handler and a condenser. And I'm going to go over several things, but most importantly I'm going to tell you the things that I wish I would have known when I started this install. And I'm going to show you my mistakes, and this video is going to be more of a basic walkthrough of what was installed. And then later on, either at the end of the video or in another video, I'll show you the actual steps. That's going to be a lengthier process. But for today, I'm going to go over the why, the cost, the air handler, the condenser. I'm going to go over the electrical wiring, the thermostat, and the electrical usage. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll go over some videos on how everything went. Okay, so number one, why did I go DIY this time? I actually went out and tried to get several bids for this project, and I had a couple mom and pop places no show on me, or they would come out, give me a bid, and when I scheduled the install, they no showed then. The other problem was when I went with the bigger box stores, or Costco installers, they would come out and the price would obviously be a lot higher, $14,000 to $28,000 for what I needed. And the biggest issue I had was that they wouldn't install the condenser in the side yard, and a traditional HVAC system that has gas hooked up to it would use a 30 by 30 condenser, so we don't have that much space here, and that would have been out to here. So they weren't willing to work with me on that, and I really don't have room in the backyard, as these lots weren't really made 30 years ago with the HVAC in mind. So I came across this website, MRCOOL. You've probably seen them. They do the DIY mini split installs where you put the unit inside the wall in the house, then you run the line set out to a slim condenser. And that's what they have here. They have a 3 to 4 ton heat pump that ties in to the central air of the home. So it works the same as the mini splits that you see, but this one is more built for an entire house versus just a room. And the cost was really hard to beat. It was cheap. The line set also comes from MRCOOL. It comes pre-charged, so there's no soldering. It's just a twist-on connection. They have good tech support. I was always emailing them back and forth. Always had questions. And one of the things I really like is that it's a slim condenser, so it's not going to stick out to here. I still have room to walk side to side. Now, I did need some help with certain portions, like building the plenums. I needed an actual HVAC person to come out and build those for me, and I had an electrician help with all the wiring because that's beyond my skill set. And the one thing to keep in mind is that unlike a traditional HVAC system where it's electric and gas depending what function you're in, this is an all-electric heat pump. So you have a 220 sub panel here, and 220 goes to the condenser and the air handler, so it's gonna need more energy than your traditional system would. So the first thing I want to go over is the cost. The cost for the air handler, the condenser, the pre-charged line set, the hanger for the air handler, the box, the whip, the wall mount that you see this on, all that was $3,600 with free shipping, and that was from Ingram's Water and Air. The one thing I want to inform you about right now, this is a Diversitech line cover, or line set cover. You can either get it on Amazon or from supplyhouse.com. This was about less than $100, and the MRCOOL line set cover for the mini splits does not fit on this system. These are bigger line sets, and they're ran independently, so they're not both in one. So this is all custom right here, and there's a custom backing back here as well. The HVAC company that I had come out and help me with the plenums and some of the ductwork, because I redid all the ducting as well, they charged me around $2,000 for labor and materials. But for those $2,000, I redid all of my ducting. I added some ducts, I moved other ducts, and I added 4 air returns in the house. the electrical, so adding the sub panel off of my main panel and having them, and I helped with this, but running wiring into the attic for the air handler. That cost around $700, but keep in mind, I had to have them come out twice because we had the wrong electrical diagram at first. So in order to correct that, we had to add more conduit to make it easier on ourselves. So it was $700 for the electrical help. One other thing I did is I went to a website called loadcalcs.net, and that's where I got the manual D and the manual J calculations to determine if my ducting was adequate for the HVAC system I was installing. And they're based out of Kentucky, I believe, and I'll put a link to them in the description, and I'll also put a link to how an HVAC works, because I think a lot of people get confused with how this works compared to a traditional air handler or blower that has a heat strip in it. So I'll put a link in the description so you can better understand what this does, because this serves both functions, heating and cooling. So the overall cost for me to DIY this whole system was around $6,500. Now compare that to the quotes I had that were $14,000 to $28,000. I think I saved a good amount of money. Now, what I'm not factoring into that price is a $700 mistake that I made, and that mistake was not tightening down the line set when I first installed it. So when I first installed it, I didn't tighten it down all the way, and the refrigerant leaked out. And I didn't know about this until months later, and it cost me $700 to have someone come out and recharge that. But now everything's working fine, and it keeps up with our 1,500 square foot 3-bed 2-bath home. So while I'm out here, I want to talk about this condenser. This is the condenser for the 3 to 4 ton universal system from MRCOOL. The cool thing is that you could switch this from 3 to 4 tons depending on the size and the needs of your home. So here you can see where the line set comes from the attic and runs down along the side of the house and runs into here. It hooks up into the condenser. The connections were kind of hard to make, and I honestly, if you have another method, I don't know if I would recommend using the line set. They're very hard to work with, and right now it would be impossible for me to move this condenser. So if you have someone that can come and do the traditional copper lines, I would almost suggest doing that, because then they can guarantee that the pressure is going to hold, and you're going to have some kind of warranty on that, you know, should it leak out, unlike what I had happen. You'll notice that it's a little wet down here. That's because the drainage to the condenser is down here. You'll see some holes. And if this were on a pad, there are extra accessories that you could use to divert that water away from the pad. But right now, since we're not on a pad, we're just here over our side yard. I didn't feel like that was really important, and the water can just freely go down there. I have a drain below ground here, so that's all taken care of. And the other thing you'll notice is that I mounted this condenser on the wall. The reason I did this is because this yard is where the dogs go to the restroom, and I didn't want the risk of a dog peeing on this thing. And so you can see this thing starting up now. So right now, it's just towards the end of winter, and the house is being heated. So as you can see, it's working, and it's tied off to a Nest thermostat. So the reason I wall mounted it, like I said, is because I didn't want the dogs to accidentally pee on that, and I mounted it onto the studs in the wall here. The bracket was also from Ingram's Heating and Air, and to be honest with you, I don't recommend doing this. It's not loud. It doesn't really vibrate too much, but if you're inside trying to have a quiet, you know, cup of coffee in the morning, you can hear the hum and you can feel the vibration. And then I want to talk about the electrical here. So we have 40 amps going to the condenser, and I believe it calls for 35, but 40 is what we had. And then 30 amps supplies the air handler. The air handler has a heat strip, so the power for the air handler has to match the heat strip that you have, and I'll show that later. and this is just an extra 20 amp breaker that goes to nothing. But initially I didn't have the heat strip wired in, so we were able to get away with a 20 amp breaker just for the air handler with no heat strip. From here you can actually see this is where power comes in from my electrical panel on the other side of the house, and this is where power goes up to the air handler. And if I had done this right the first time, we would only have one conduit here, but like I said, the electrician had to come back and we had to redo all that. And some things to keep in mind here: this is a drain line. This is the main drain line for the air handler. The condensation is coming off of the condenser, and you can see the water down there, right? It's wet. During the summer months, when the air handler is the one that's getting cold, the condensation will happen within the air handler unit. That has a drainage system, and it will drain out of here and come out there. And if we move over here a little bit, the air handler has a drain pan underneath it that acts as a like a secondary containment slash emergency system in case something is clogged with our main drain. It'll start dripping out of that pipe, and it's in front of a window, so we can, you know, if we see water coming out of that, we'll know something is wrong. We'll be able to address the issue. Now we're going to go over the air handler. As you can see, I decided to move this unit from the garage into the attic, primarily just because I wanted it out of sight and I wanted a little more room in my garage for other things. So in order to have this thing up here, I needed to get a quick sling. This is the quick sling SG1000, I believe, and this just ties into my rafters up here. It's lag bolted on, and there's another piece that runs underneath. That's what holds the air handler. The air handler weighs 156 pounds, so it's not too much weight on here, but it definitely holds. And there's also some some skid pads that are on here. And to be honest with you, this thing doesn't really make any noise. All it is it's a fan, and it's refrigerant running through lines. So I've never had an issue with this being loud or vibrating. Here's the line set that we have going to the system. This is the line set that goes to the condenser, and it comes into here and ties in here. This is pretty straightforward. This is, again, the MRCOOL Quick Connect system. They come in certain lengths. We're talking 15 feet, 25 feet, 50 feet. This is the 50 footer, and I have maybe 10 extra feet of line set that's just kind of curled up in the back here that I had nothing to do with. And you can't cut this, so you have to use it as is. You can go up to 75 feet from condenser to air handler. So right now we're at 50. The other thing I wanted to cover is there is an internal drain pan here for the coils that do the heating or the cooling. So during the summer months, when they're doing the cooling, the condensation will drip into the internal pan, and then it'll drain out of here. And here I've built this little funky P-trap, and this is the line that goes out, and it follows the line set and drains into the side yard. But the reason I made this funky P-trap is because the air filter goes into here. This is a 20 by 20 by 1 air filter that goes in this little section here. If I only had one air return in the house, I could just put the filter on that air return cover. But because I have 4 air returns in the house, I have to rely on the only section that I could put an air filter in here on the air handler. It's a pain, because in theory you're supposed to change the air filter 3+ times or 4 times a year, and I don't really want to be coming up here that often. So what I did is I bought a 1-year air filter off of Amazon. I'm going to see how it holds up, but again, I don't want to be coming up here all the time. You'll notice that there's also a drain pan here. This is my fail-safe in case something goes wrong here, and instead of the water damaging the ceiling inside the house, it'll fill up here. And on the other side of this drain pan, there's another PVC hose that goes out, and it comes out above our kitchen window. So if there was water coming out of there, we could see that something was wrong. And in addition to this, I've also added a cheap little water leak detection device that just takes, I believe it's a 9-volt battery. This thing right here. So if you get one of these for the drain pan, don't put it in the middle of the drain pan, because if there's ever condensation on here and it drips into the pan, you know, it might be only a couple ounces of it, but it'll trigger this, so you don't want that. So I kind of put it off to the side, like up here. That way, if water does start filling this at a significant rate, I'll hear it before I see it, and I can deal with it accordingly. The other thing we need to talk about is the power that supplies this air handler. There is a 30 amp heat strip that's right around here by the plenum. And the way the power works, and I'll put a wiring diagram up with this, but the power supplies this breaker, which supplies the heat strip. From there, there's another connection that supplies the air handler. So there's no need to wire more than 30 amps to this. And that's the first one of the mistakes that I made, is that I thought I had to have 30 amps to the heat strip and another 20 amps to the air handler. And luckily tech support was there for me, because I probably would have damaged the system. And the next thing I wanted to show you was the new plenums that had to be built for this system. These had to be custom made. And that's these right here. In the next video, I'll show you guys how these were made, but they're made specifically to fit this opening. And then here we have some sealing tape to make sure no air gets out. And they're screwed on using some self-tapping screws. And then from here, obviously, you know, we have our starter collars that feed the rest of the house. So, you know, this may feed, you know, some of the bedrooms and the bathrooms. I think this one curls up and it goes to the master bedroom, one of the bathrooms, and the closet. And I'm going to show you guys back here. Oh, one other thing I wanted to point out is this is the power that powers the heat strip and the air handler. And like I said before, it's all 220, all right? So there's no 110 in here. These two wires, these are the thermostat wires. So one of these goes to the actual Nest thermostat in the house. The other one goes to the condenser. So the condenser and the air handler talk to each other through this. And that goes down with the line set. So it's in the line set cover. This is what I mean. This is where the air filter is. So again, when your air filter, hopefully I never have to come up and mess with it. Main drain line with a P-trap built in. And this is my air return. So this is about 20 by 20 inches. And from this side, this is the air return from the master bedroom and the kids' bedrooms. And that goes along, you know, the side of the house there. If we cut across over here, you can see my drain line that goes out to the side of the house. You can see that my line set, here's my extra 10 feet that I couldn't really do anything with those 10 feet. It's very hard to manipulate these lines, and that's just how they ended up. So not pretty, but they do their job. Anyway, the line set goes out and goes down. My electrical also comes from that side of the house. And this big duct right here, this is my main air return that goes to the most center part of the house, and I believe that's a 16-inch one, so it's rather large. And then aside from that, I used these straps to hang all the ducting up wherever necessary. So what I tried to do is hang everything up kind of out of the way so I could still walk around back here and do whatever I needed to do. All right, we'll move over here and I'll kind of just show you how the rest of this ducting runs. Okay, so this is the plenum that supplies the house. There's 3 10-inch starter collars and 1 12-inch collar on the other side. But through these 4 outlets, this is what either cools or cools the home. Every single vent has a damper on it. So this one, for example, this comes off the plenum and there's nothing constricting the air. But once we get to here, here's the vent, right? And here's my Y. There is a damper here so that I can adjust the amount of air going into this vent, and I can adjust the damper going to the next section too. So keep that in mind. It's an easy way to be able to control the airflow throughout the house, because inadvertently, you know, some areas of the house got more air than others, so I had to come up here and kind of tweak things to get things just right. But this right here is a whole house fan. This is what we used to cool the house before the HVAC was put in, and now we honestly never use it anymore, but it's there. And back to the ducting, you can see how I ran it kind of off to the side, and that pretty much goes to supply the rest of the house. I started off with HVAC help, you know, with the ducting, but my helps they stopped showing up after a while, so I had to finish this ducting with the help of friends. And I'm sure you'll see things that if you're a pro, you're like, hey, that's not how we do it. Well, keep in mind, I was kind of left solo here, so we're kind of figuring it out. We figured it out as we went. Anyhow, that's basically it. That's all my ducting, and like I said, I'll post some stuff later on the process of actually running things up here and whatnot. Ducting was a pain in the ass. We redid all of the ducts in this house, and that meant adding some vents, moving some vents, and we added a main air return here, but there now is an air return in every single bedroom, the 2 kids' rooms and the master bedroom. So we have 4 sources where that serve as air returns. And this is where I want to explain the conflict that happened between the HVAC plans I had made and what common practice is for local contractors. I had plans made by loadcalcs.net. What they did is I sent them all my dimensions of my house. I sent them like a blueprint, and I told them where my vents currently were. And what they did is they calculated that, you know, based on the system that I wanted to install, what ducting would I need in order to efficiently run that system. So one of the things that they suggested was adding returns in every room, therefore improving air circulation throughout the house. And there was also a couple other vents that needed to be added in the kitchen. I also had to make some vents a little bit bigger, and I tried to stay true to their plans, and they did what's called a manual D and a manual J calculations to figure out my new plans. The problem was when I had HVAC guys come, they didn't really know what to do with these plans, because to them it wasn't common practice to do what these plans wanted. And these plans were drawn by someone in a different state than California. So although they might have been correct in terms of calculations, the local HVAC guys had no means of actually making that system happen. So I let them tweak it as needed, and what that ended up causing is for them to redo the whole thing using their experience of doing ducting. And what they ended up setting me up with was a lot different than what I had drawn up. And at first this caused a lot of concern because I had twice as many ducts coming off of my plenum than the plans called for. But in the end, everything worked out fine. From what I understand it, the common practice is not to follow these plans necessarily. The last contractor I talked to said oftentimes when they follow the plans, they end up failing the ducting Hearst testing later on. So what they like to do is oversize the ducting. The other thing is that the plans called for lots of odd numbered ducts, like 5-inch or 9-inch. And in our area, common practice is to use 4, 6, 8, 10, 12-inch ducts. So it was impossible, even going to Home Depot, to find a 9-inch duct. So that made things really hard. And so one issue that we had in this house is that during the summers, this side of the house, which faces south, would just get blasted with sun. This room would be hot, as well as the master bedroom. So in order to reduce the amount of energy usage that would be required to cool the house, we had these sliders tinted. And they were tinted with a clear ceramic coat, and it cost about $600. But the hope is that this is going to allow this room, the master bedroom, to stay cool, and it allows the HVAC system to actually circulate the air throughout the house without having to fight these two rooms. So we'll see how it works out, you know, overall. I mean, you can't even tell that there's anything there. It's as close as clear as we could make it. The next thing I want to talk about is the energy usage. I want to start off by saying that the system is working really well, and I'm really impressed with how well it's kept up. Right now we have it in the heating setting, so it's keeping our house at 68 degrees throughout the day, and it's been working just fine. And when I first installed the system and turned it on, it was during the summer months, and I noticed right away that there was issues with the system keeping up, you know, with the heat. We're talking, you know, it was maybe 105 outside, and it was struggling to keep the house in the low 70s. And at first I didn't really know how to fix the issue. I didn't know if it was an issue with the system or with the ducting, since the ducting that was installed was different than the plans I had drawn up. So I didn't know if it was because of that, and the HVAC guy would no longer return my calls. So I didn't know what to do. During the winter months, I noticed that the heat strip was running constantly. And the reason I was able to see that is because through the Nest app, it shows you when the heat strip is activated. And that kind of came up as a red flag, because the heat strip is there for emergency use, or, you know, if anything goes wrong with the system. And the thing with the heat strip use is that it's a very inefficient way to heat the house. But like I said, it's for emergencies only. And my PG&E bill started skyrocketing during those 2 or 3 months that the heat strip was kicking on constantly. So I did a little more digging, and what I found was that one of my connections in the line set to the condenser wasn't tightened all the way. So I had leaked out refrigerant, and the air handler and the condenser didn't really have any other choice but to use the heat strip. So that's what I mentioned earlier, that was my $700 mistake. I had to go out and get some bids for someone to recharge the system, which is a little hard to do, because once an HVAC contractor, especially, you know, your big box place, finds out that, you know, it was a DIY system, or it's a system that they're not used to, their, I guess, risk of liability goes up. And, you know, the first company had come out wanted to charge me around $1,500 to diagnose the issue, do a vacuum test, and refill my line set, even though I already knew where the problem was. But I ended up finding a really cool HVAC contractor in the area, and he was able to come, and we undid the threads or the connection on the line set that was leaking, he was able to use a product, it was called Nylog Blue, and he put that in the threads, and we tightened that back up. Once that was set, he was able to drain the system and pressure test it, and then recharge the system. All in all, it was a couple hours of work, and he, charged around $700. And now the system's been working fine. Like I said, we have it in the heat setting right now. I have no complaints whatsoever. One thing that this HVAC person mentioned was that although my ducting is somewhat oversized, it shouldn't really matter. It's better to be oversized than undersized, because if you're undersized, now you're straining the air handler motor. So he gave me some reassurance that I didn't have anything to worry about as far as ducting goes, and luckily my issue was with the refrigerant, so now that that's all fixed, everything's working just fine. And what I'm also going to show you guys is, I'll cut to my PG&E statement just so you can see the usage throughout the winter. And right now we're kind of transitioning from the cold months to the warmer months, so my use of the air handler is less and less, and luckily it's being offset by the solar. And I'll also cut to the thermostat and show the settings that I have it in. You've got to factor some different things in when wiring a Nest thermostat for a heat pump, because it also has to know that there's a heat strip in the system, and it has to know when to use it, and you can alter those settings. So right now, since I got the line set fixed, the heat strip has never turned on. It has never had to. So that's great. My energy bill is way down because of it.